nuclear war would profoundly alter life on Earth as we know it. Here are 15 predictions about what could unfold in its aftermath. Number 1. Immediate massive casualties. Initial blasts would devastate targeted areas, causing immense loss of life. Cities in the direct impact zones would be obliterated in seconds, with entire neighborhoods reduced to rubble. The shockwave from a nuclear detonation would flatten buildings, shatter glass, and obliterate anything nearby. Those close to the epicenter would have no chance of survival due to the intense heat and pressure. Beyond the blast radius, fires would erupt, creating massive firestorms that engulf anything still standing. Critical infrastructure like hospitals, roads, and communication networks would be destroyed, leaving survivors without emergency services. The loss of infrastructure would make rescue efforts nearly impossible, worsening the humanitarian crisis. Survivors would face dire conditions with the air filled with dust, ash, and radioactive particles. Access to clean water, food, and medical care would be nearly impossible. Injuries and radiation exposure would overwhelm any remaining medical facilities, leading to severe suffering. Many would face radiation sickness, a painful and often deadly condition. The psychological impact would be immense. Survivors would grapple with the sudden loss of loved ones, homes, and communities. The scale of destruction and collapse of infrastructure would plunge people into despair, causing widespread chaos as they struggled for safety, food, and shelter. Number 2. Nuclear winter aftermath. In the aftermath of a nuclear war, the world would face a terrifying challenge: nuclear winter. Massive firestorms from nuclear detonations would send immense quantities of soot and smoke into the atmosphere, forming a thick layer that blocks sunlight. With drastically reduced sunlight, Earth's surface would cool rapidly, leading to a prolonged and severe cold spell. The consequences would affect not just the climate, but all aspects of life on Earth. The immediate impact of nuclear winter would be on agriculture. With sunlight blocked, photosynthesis would slow dramatically, causing widespread crop failures. This agricultural collapse would affect the entire global food system. Temperatures could drop by several degrees, shortening growing seasons and creating harsh conditions for staple crops. Without enough food, global food trade would unravel, and countries around the world would face severe shortages. Mass starvation would become a grim reality. Food stockpiles would dwindle, and without new harvests, nations could be plunged into famine. The collapse of food systems would likely lead to social upheaval, conflict over resources, and societal breakdowns. Even areas not directly hit by nuclear weapons would suffer from the global effects of nuclear winter, forcing people into desperate situations. Beyond agriculture, nuclear winter would have lasting effects on ecosystems and biodiversity. Many animal species, unable to adapt to the sudden temperature drop and food scarcity, would face extinction. Entire ecosystems could collapse, particularly those that are already fragile. The cooling effect could last for years, making recovery uncertain and slow. Number 3. Long-term radiation sickness. Long-term radiation sickness would be one of the most harrowing consequences for nuclear war survivors. Though some might escape the initial blast, lingering radiation would create a prolonged health crisis. Acute radiation sickness occurring shortly after exposure could cause nausea, vomiting, burns, and internal damage. High doses could lead to death within days or weeks. Chronic radiation exposure would cause lasting health problems, including cancers that develop years later. Leukemia and thyroid cancer would be common, especially among children, whose developing bodies are more vulnerable. Increased cancer rates would leave survivors living in fear of future health consequences. Radiation exposure would also weaken immune systems, cause cardiovascular disease, and damage reproductive organs. Birth defects and genetic mutations would rise, affecting future generations. Contaminated food, water, and soil would further endanger those who avoided direct exposure, making clean resources hazardous. Survivors would face anxiety over uncertain health, haunted by fears of cancer and genetic damage. Communities would struggle under widespread illness, loss, and social collapse. Once vibrant areas would become wastelands, haunted by invisible radiation. Number 4. Environmental catastrophe. The environmental catastrophe following a nuclear war would be devastating, with radioactive materials contaminating air, water, and soil. Vast stretches of land would become uninhabitable for decades, if not centuries. Ecosystems would collapse with plants and animals poisoned, leading to widespread biodiversity loss. Entire regions would become wastelands, altering the natural landscape permanently. Water sources would be heavily contaminated, making lakes, rivers, and aquifers toxic for both humans and wildlife. Radioactive water would spread, affecting areas far beyond initial blast sites and making clean water scarce. Aquatic life would die off, disrupting food chains and harming the broader environment. Radiation in soil would make growing food nearly impossible. Crops in irradiated areas would absorb harmful particles, making them unsafe to eat. Grazing animals would ingest these particles, further contaminating the food chain. This would lead to severe food shortages, exacerbating famine and societal collapse. Contamination would also affect the broader biosphere. Migratory animals would spread radiation, perpetuating environmental damage. Vital ecosystems like forests and wetlands would be decimated, causing the loss of countless species and weakening the planet's resilience. Rebuilding would be incredibly difficult. Fertile areas would become hazardous, hindering efforts to restore agriculture and infrastructure. The persistent presence of radiation would make recovery a struggle, ensuring the devastating effects of nuclear war would endure long after the initial blasts. Number 5. Collapse of global economies. In the aftermath of a nuclear war, the collapse of global economies would be immediate and devastating. Destruction from the blasts would annihilate critical infrastructure, halting all basic economic activities. Cities, once bustling centers of commerce, would be reduced to rubble, with banks, offices, and factories destroyed. The loss of infrastructure would cripple industries, leaving millions jobless. The workforce would be decimated, with countless lives lost and many more incapacitated by injuries or radiation sickness. Survivors struggling to find food, water, and shelter would be unable to contribute to economic recovery. The interconnected global economy would collapse as countries, now isolated, could no longer produce or acquire essential goods. The collapse would lead to widespread poverty and scarcity, plunging the world into a humanitarian crisis. Production of essentials like food and medicine would become nearly impossible. Scarcity would drive prices sky high, forcing people to resort to exchanging goods and services without using money. The breakdown of economic systems would lead to theft, violence, and chaos as people compete for limited resources. International aid would be nearly impossible. Countries facing their own crises would be unable to assist others, and trade routes would be disrupted. Global institutions would be powerless, lacking resources to coordinate recovery. Nations would be left to fend for themselves with limited means to rebuild. Number 6. Breakdown of social order. As resources dwindle, competition for food, water, and medical care would intensify. This struggle could lead to social unrest, with neighbors seeing each other as threats. Without functioning law enforcement or government, crime would skyrocket. Looting, theft, and violence would become common, and people might take the law into their own hands, leading to vigilantism and further conflict. The psychological trauma of nuclear devastation would further contribute to the breakdown. Survivors facing loss, destruction, and fear of radiation would be plagued by PTSD, anxiety, and depression. This trauma would hinder cooperation, spreading mistrust and paranoia, and making recovery efforts almost impossible. Without a stable social framework, governments and emergency services would be overwhelmed. Local leaders might emerge, but would lack resources to maintain peace. Factions could form over scarce resources or ideological differences, leading to further violence and power struggles. Number 7. Disruption of food and water supplies. After a nuclear war, the disruption of food and water supplies would be one of the most severe challenges for survivors. Nuclear winter, caused by soot and ash blocking sunlight, would make agriculture nearly impossible. Crops would fail, temperatures would plummet, and growing seasons would be shortened or eliminated, leading to widespread famine and little access to food. Food scarcity would weaken survivors, making them more susceptible to illness and disease. Livestock would also die, further limiting food options. Malnutrition would lead to weakened immune systems and high mortality rates. Food riots and violence would likely erupt as people fought over dwindling supplies, leading to further instability. Lack of food and water would lead to disease outbreaks. Poor sanitation would contribute to the spread of waterborne diseases like cholera and dysentery. Malnutrition and dehydration would make infections even deadlier, creating a vicious cycle of suffering and death. Survival would be uncertain for even the healthiest individuals. The young, elderly, and infirm would be especially vulnerable. Without access to basic necessities, any hope of recovery would be distant, and the struggle for essential resources would define the lives of those who survived, leading to a slow and agonizing fight for survival. Number 8. Healthcare system collapse. In the aftermath of a nuclear war, the collapse of healthcare systems would be one of the most immediate and devastating consequences. The overwhelming number of casualties and scarcity of medical resources would prevent adequate treatment for the injured and sick. Many hospitals would be destroyed, and the remaining facilities would be overcrowded, understaffed, and quickly run out of supplies, turning them into chaotic places of despair. Without timely medical attention, treatable injuries such as fractures or burns would become life-threatening. Radiation sickness would go largely untreated, leading to increased fatalities. Chronic conditions like diabetes and heart disease would also become deadly without medication or intervention. Poor sanitation, contaminated water, and weakened immune systems would lead to rampant disease outbreaks. Survivors would also face long-term health issues from radiation exposure, including increased cancer rates and genetic mutations. These conditions would go largely untreated, further compounding the crisis. Number 9. Technological regression. The destruction of infrastructure and the loss of skilled professionals would set humanity back by decades or centuries. Power grids, communication networks, and factories would be damaged or destroyed, leaving survivors unable to maintain current technological standards. The loss of engineers, scientists, and technicians would be devastating. Without these experts, restoring and maintaining infrastructure would be nearly impossible. The remaining population would struggle to keep even basic technology functioning, leading to a rapid decline in capabilities, affecting power, communication, and medical care. Even surviving technology would be difficult to maintain. Spare parts, tools, and factories would be scarce, and global supply chains would be severed. Survivors might rely on makeshift repairs just to keep essential equipment running. As machinery breaks down, societies would regress to simpler technologies. This regression would greatly hinder recovery efforts. Producing clean water, generating power, and growing food would become far more labor-intensive. Medical technology would regress, increasing mortality from treatable conditions. Communication would be limited, making coordination nearly impossible, and recovery would be slow and arduous. Future innovation would also be affected. Technological advancement relies on existing infrastructure, much of which would be lost. Progress would stall, and the focus would shift from innovation to mere survival. The path back to modern capabilities would be long and uncertain, with the consequences of nuclear war affecting generations to come. Number 10. Loss of biodiversity. A nuclear war would lead to a massive loss of biodiversity. Destruction from blasts would wipe out entire habitats, causing plant and animal species to vanish. Survivors would face radioactive contamination, lowered temperatures, and scarcity of resources. Many species would be unable to adapt, leading to ecosystem collapse. Nuclear winter would worsen the crisis. With soot blocking sunlight, temperatures would drop, killing many species. Plants would wither, leading to food shortages and collapsing food chains. Aquatic environments would be contaminated, killing fish and disrupting ecosystems. Loss of biodiversity would hinder planetary recovery. Healthy ecosystems rely on diverse species. With key species gone, processes like pollination and population control would be disrupted, making recovery difficult. Humans would be directly affected by the lack of clean air, water, and food. Number 11. Cultural and knowledge loss. After a nuclear war, the loss of human knowledge and cultural heritage would be catastrophic, though some information might survive in data centers and on the internet. Libraries, universities, and museums, key repositories of physical books, research, and artifacts, could be destroyed, leaving critical gaps in our understanding of history, science, and culture. While fragments of digital knowledge might remain, much of the expertise needed to interpret and apply it could be lost. The absence of libraries and educational institutions would severely limit the ability to pass on essential knowledge. Fields like medicine, engineering, and agriculture would suffer greatly, forcing survivors to relearn crucial skills through trial and error. Progress in science and technology could be set back by decades or even centuries, despite scattered remnants of knowledge stored digitally. Cultural artifacts such as artworks, monuments, and historical relics, symbols of identity and continuity, might be irreparably damaged. This loss would weaken societal cohesion, leaving survivors disconnected from their heritage and struggling to find meaning or a sense of belonging in a shattered world. While some digital knowledge might remain accessible, the lack of widespread education and infrastructure would hinder recovery. New generations, deprived of formal schooling, would struggle to rebuild. With few teachers and resources, developing critical skills would be slow, delaying the restoration of infrastructure and social systems. Number 12. Psychological trauma and mental health crisis. The psychological trauma following a nuclear war would be profound, affecting nearly every survivor. The devastation, losing loved ones, homes, and a sense of safety, would lead to widespread mental health crises. PTSD, depression, and anxiety would be rampant, leaving people struggling to move forward in a shattered world. Survivors would cope not only with physical devastation, but also deep psychological wounds. PTSD would be common, with survivors haunted by traumatic events, explosions, chaos, and destruction. Nightmares, flashbacks, and constant fear would make daily life difficult. Triggers like loud noises could cause panic, hindering survivors' ability to rebuild or participate in recovery efforts. Depression and anxiety would also take a heavy toll. The overwhelming loss and uncertainty would lead to hopelessness, making it hard to envision a future. Anxiety about radiation and further threats would drain energy and motivation, impeding attempts to rebuild communities. With healthcare systems overwhelmed, mental health services would be nearly non-existent. Without support, many would isolate themselves, worsening the crisis. This lack of social connection would make coping harder and weaken social bonds, hindering collective recovery efforts. Psychological wounds would linger for generations, reducing survivors' quality of life. Number 13. Collapse of communication networks. After a nuclear war, communication networks would be among the first systems to collapse. The destruction of infrastructure like cell towers, satellites, and data centers would isolate entire regions. People would be unable to seek help, coordinate rescue, or stay informed, leading to chaos and confusion. Without functioning communication systems, rescue efforts would be disorganized. Emergency responders would lack critical information, and survivors would struggle to convey their needs. The absence of coordinated relief would lead to higher casualties, with many stranded and without aid. The collapse of communication networks would also create an information vacuum. Without reliable channels, rumors and misinformation would spread unchecked, leading to panic and misguided actions. The lack of accurate information would deepen fear and complicate survival efforts. Rebuilding society would be severely hindered. Communication is vital for restoring infrastructure, services, and social order. Without it, collaboration and efficient use of resources would be impossible, making recovery slow and fragmented. Number 14. Global refugee crisis. In the aftermath of a nuclear war, a massive refugee crisis would emerge. Millions of survivors would flee contaminated areas, overwhelming less affected regions and straining already scarce supplies of food, water, and shelter. Refugee camps, if established, would be overcrowded and under-resourced. Providing food, medical care, and sanitation would be nearly impossible, increasing the risk of disease. Scarce resources would lead to tensions and conflicts within camps and with local populations, destabilizing fragile areas. International support systems would be overwhelmed. Countries that might provide aid would be dealing with fallout, making cooperation difficult. The chaotic logistics of moving supplies and coordinating aid would leave countless people without needed support. The long-term consequences would be severe. Displaced people would lose homes, communities, and livelihoods, making recovery difficult. Children would face limited education and lasting trauma, leaving many in prolonged vulnerability. The mass movement of people would pressure political systems. Governments facing large displaced populations could face backlash, with citizens viewing refugees as competitors for resources. This could increase nationalist sentiments, complicating recovery efforts. Number 15. Energy crisis. In the aftermath of a nuclear war, a severe energy crisis would be one of the most critical challenges. The destruction of power plants and fuel supplies would halt modern life. Without electricity, essential infrastructure like hospitals, water treatment, and communication systems would fail, making survival extremely difficult. Basic tasks like heating, cooking, and preserving supplies would become major challenges. In cold regions, lack of heating would lead to increased deaths. Fuel shortages would limit transportation, hindering movement of supplies and aid, delaying reconstruction efforts. Agriculture would be severely impacted. Modern farming relies on machinery and irrigation, both needing power. Without these, food production would plummet, worsening shortages caused by nuclear winter. Rudimentary farming methods would be insufficient, leading to widespread hunger. Communities without energy would face weakened resilience. Darkness and lack of communication would increase fear and mistrust, leading to social breakdown. Scarce power would also mean limited clean water and sanitation, raising the risk of disease outbreaks. The energy crisis would also stall economic recovery. Factories would be unable to operate, halting production of essential goods. Until energy supplies were restored, progress would be slow, making recovery prospects bleak. Nations must collaborate to prevent nuclear war and avoid the global consequences outlined in this video. Thanks for watching. Make sure to watch this next video about the future of the world.